Congratulations if you've been offered a PhD position at a university. You deserve to be commended because getting a PhD is quite competitive. But what is even much more competitive is the job market after you have completed your PhD. And that is why it is very important to think about whether you should do a PhD by a monograph or a PhD by publication. What has famously become known as publish or perish has meant that getting a PhD certificate through a monograph just not enough. So, what is a PhD by publication and what is a PhD by a monograph?
A new place, a new home for a while. Let me feel alive.
That is what I am going to be talking about in this particular video. So, traditionally, doing a PhD has involved writing a compendium or an extensive essay on a particular topic. And typically this will take you about 3 or probably more years, depending on whether you are studying as a full-time student or as a part-time student. So on one particular topic, you would spend time to review an extensive amount of literature, think through how you will design your research, whether it's going to be an empirical work or it's just theoretical, and then you would write up your results, do analysis, write up, and then you hand in a very extensive amount of work. Very bulky. And then of course, at the end of it all, you have this monograph, this long essay called your PhD thesis. You submit, 3 years done and dusted, you are a doctor. You go on to the job market. But now, experience on the academic job market, it is becoming increasingly clear that producing that single document called a monograph is just not enough. So what are recruiters looking for? Recruiters are looking for PhD students who, while doing their PhD, can demonstrate that they are able to publish academic work. Now, this is no joke. It's no easy feat doing a PhD by publication. So what is a PhD by publication? It's essentially about producing academic outputs from your doctoral research. This means that you need to think differently about how you frame your research, how you formulate your research questions, and at the end of the day, what you produce as your research outputs. Is it up to you to just decide whether you want to do a PhD by a monograph or a PhD by publication? I don't think it is entirely in your hands. It depends very much on the institution that you'll be studying your PhD in. Some institutions are very experienced in this. This is usually the norm. It is the norm for people to do PhD by publication. What that means is that they already have the experience. So if you are interested in doing a PhD by publication, there will be somebody who will be able to mentor you, who will be able to guide you and coach you to be able to go through the process. At universities where this is usually not the norm, you would often be discouraged from doing that. But if you ask me, which one should you do? My response will be, if you are a prolific writer, if you feel that you have gotten a very good understanding of the literature, of the area in which you are researching, then I think that you should consider doing the PhD by publication. So what would you have to publish then if you are going to do a PhD by publication? So I understand from the process of doing a PhD by publication, it doesn't mean that you have to publish all publications from your PhD before you are awarded the PhD. What that means is that you have to agree with your supervisor how many publications will be deemed sufficient to merit the award of the PhD. In some universities, you need to have one fully published paper and another paper that is under review, and possibly a third paper that is ready for submission. And all these papers must form a coherent narrative or make a substantial contribution to the subject that you are studying. Some are very good and very prolific to the extent that they can actually get more than 2 or even 3 papers published before the end of the doctoral program. So you really need to think about what are the kind of support systems that are available to you as you think about whether you want to do the PhD by publication. So my advice is, most of us, we do the monograph. We start the PhD, we spend about 6 months doing extensive amount of literature. We do that. You probably will go through what is called a first year assessment. You produce a report of your first year, and then you go and then you defend. You have a viva, you defend your first year report, and then you are signed off. You are now admitted as a candidate, and then you are allowed to now go on to do an experiment or do an empirical work. But what I learned from colleagues who are doing the PhD by publication is right from the word go, they are minded to get publications out of whatever they are doing. So whilst you and I will do our literature review and we will use that to get an empirical understanding, formulate questions, design research instruments, they are thinking about the first publication. Their first publication is usually from their literature review. Some will publish on a systematic review of the subjects that they are researching, or some of the issues that they've come across, a review of that. Why? Because that is what principally in the first year you spend your time doing. So, I mean, it's just a bonus, because all of us, whether you are going to be doing a PhD by monograph or PhD by publication, you would need to start off with some literature review, except of course you are doing some kind of grounded theoretical research where you start with empirical work before you come back and do anything that is theoretical. But most of us will start off with some literature review. So right there you have got your first publication. So your literature review, essentially, it's your first publication, and that will mean that the next step will be, what are the questions that your literature review, the questions your literature review have raised, and how do you pursue them? And then your second and your third and possibly your fourth question will be something that you and your supervisor would have to discuss. Do you have to write the PhD publication all by yourself? Well, to a large extent, yes, because it is your doctoral research and you are supposed to take leadership of it. But in some cases, you would see students collaborating with their supervisors. I am very confident that in most of these cases, it's predominantly the student who does the work. So you would definitely do all the work. But then, of course, you would have the benefit of your supervisor in terms of technical insights, in terms of maybe doing some proofing for you, and in terms of helping you to navigate the publication process. So you would extensively do the work. In cases where it's not just you probably work in a lab and a number of people are involved in the paper, you need to disclose what proportion of the paper came from you, how much did you contribute towards that. And so the entire team would have to indicate how each person is contributing towards that. But then you also have to think about, at the end of the program, how do you then write a coherent narrative that brings together all the papers that you've written? So it's not just writing a number of disparate or unconnected papers. The papers you produce must be connected. They can be connected conceptually, they can be connected from a very theoretical point of view, or they can be connected from many different points of view, but you need to find that anchor that you say that all these 3 papers that I've published are connected to this particular phenomenon or this particular subject, and this is how they are connected. So what most people will do after these 3 or 4 publications that have been done, you would write an introduction where you show where all these 3 papers sits in terms of the area you are working in and the contribution that they make, and then you write a synthesis of how you bring all these 3 papers together to make a coherent narrative, and then you conclude. So it's not just a matter of publishing 3 papers and you just pack your bag and baggage and you leave your lab or you leave your institution. At the end of the day, after you've gotten all these 3 distinct publications or related publications, you will still need to be able to show how all of them think that this is a skill, this is an area that is fast becoming highly sought after. You will finish your PhD, and whether you want to do a postdoctoral research or you want to go into full permanent academic position, aside having a PhD, recruiters will be looking for the publications you have. I can't overemphasize that they will definitely consider whether you got publications, and it wouldn't be sufficient to say, oh, I did a PhD by monograph, so I don't have any publication at all. So if you come up against somebody who did a PhD by publication, then that person has already got publications to their name, but they also have the PhD certificate, which you also have. So you realize that they have more advantage than you do. So in essence, all I'm trying to say is that, well, if you are given the opportunity to do a PhD by monograph or a PhD by publication, think about doing the PhD by publication, just because we are thinking in terms of the long term, in terms of how do you make yourself marketable, how do you make yourself competitive in the academic job market, which is increasingly becoming very difficult and very crowded. So that is one sure way that you can clearly set yourself apart. Now somebody may ask the question, well, I don't think that I am prolific enough to write a publication, do a PhD by publication. That is fine. I didn't do a PhD by publication, but once I got to have these conversations with my colleagues who were doing PhD by publication, I became inspired and I said, look, I will try and get at least one publication from my PhD. So at the end of the day, by the time I was having my Viva, I had already published one paper from my doctoral thesis. And during the Viva, when I mentioned that I've already gotten one publication from my thesis, my examiners were very impressed that you've been able to do a monograph, but you've still been able to produce a paper. So I think that it's really a feather in your cap if you are able to do some publication. Even if you are doing a monograph, try and at least get one publication before you hand in your thesis. That will open your chances, and that will make you very competitive in the job market. So in essence, that's what I wanted to share, and I believe that you will enjoy your PhD journey. But think long and hard about whether you want to do the PhD by publication or by monograph. Thank you very much. If you like this video, I would encourage you to subscribe, comment, ask questions,